For more than a century, Thailand has witnessed murders that defied understanding, crimes driven by greed, obsession, superstition, and pure calculation. From a woman who used cyanide to eliminate anyone who stood in her way, to a serial strangler who walked free, only to kill again, to drivers murdered for their trucks, children lost to fear and myth, and a monk whose iron chests hid unspeakable secrets. These are not just stories from different eras. They are warnings carved into Thailand's history, proof that evil does not disappear. It only changes its face. Tonight, we look into 5 serial killers who terrorized Thailand. On April 14, 2023, the death of Sararat Pumpuang first appeared to be nothing more than a sudden tragedy. She had come to a quiet riverbank in Ratchaburi with her friend, Sararat Rangsiwuthaporn, to release fish as part of a Buddhist ritual. People nearby recalled how she laughed and chatted while preparing the offerings, and how everything changed suddenly when her body began to tremble. She collapsed within seconds, gasping for air, her limbs convulsing on the ground. Paramedics arrived, but there was nothing to save. Stayed beside her, crying and repeating that it must have been a heart problem. And just like many unexpected deaths around her, a simple explanation almost ended the story right there. But Sararat's brother questioned what others didn't. Her gold necklace was missing, and hours before collapsing, she had transferred 50,000 baht to He requested an autopsy, a request that is uncommon but not impossible. When the toxicology report confirmed cyanide poisoning, everything changed. The case was no longer an accident, it was homicide. Investigators quietly began reviewing history, expecting perhaps a financial dispute or a personal conflict. Instead, they found a pattern stretching back nearly a decade, deaths that happened abruptly, consistently, and always around the same woman. Sararat Rangsiwuthaporn, born in 1988 in Ratchaburi, was a small-time vendor who lived quietly with her 2 daughters after divorcing a mid-ranking police officer. On the surface, she appeared gentle, family-oriented, and often took part in merit-making rituals. Detectives pulled older files from various provinces, cases labeled as sudden collapse, unexplained cardiac arrest, respiratory failure, and fainting spells that escalated too quickly to save. In each one, appeared either as a friend, a business partner, a debtor, or someone simply present at the scene. A boyfriend in 2022 who died shortly after meeting her. A relative in 2021 who collapsed after drinking coffee she prepared, the only person who survived. A business associate in 2020 who died within minutes of eating food she bought. A colleague in 2019 found in his room, with being the last person who spoke to him. A cousin in 2018 who died hours after a family visit. And years before that, a series of friends and acquaintances who had lent her money and died soon after. The emerging picture was impossible to ignore. 14 suspicious deaths formed a timeline from 2015 to 2023, and stood at the center of all of them. When detectives examined her finances, they found debts from online gambling, unpaid loans, failed investments, and private borrowings that accumulated into a tangled mess. Each time she came under pressure, someone close to her conveniently died, and every time she appeared grieving, attending funerals as if she were another victim of fate. The consistency was chilling. When investigators tracked her phones and bank transfers, the case solidified. Locations matched moments before each death with near-perfect accuracy. Transfers flowed from victims to her accounts, sometimes minutes before collapse. CCTV captured her handing drinks, food, or gifts to people who would die later that same day. And when officers finally arrested her on April 25, 2023, they found potassium cyanide in her handbag, an unmistakable signature of the poison that had killed Sararat and very likely many others before her. Even then, maintained absolute calm. She denied every accusation, no matter how overwhelming the evidence became. She denied being at the scenes, even when phone data placed her there. She denied receiving valuables, even when police recovered them. She denied every connection, even as families testified that she was the last person their loved ones met. Her denial became part of the story, an eerie, unwavering refusal that contrasted with the growing mountain of proof. As the investigation widened, one person repeatedly appeared on the periphery of her activities: her ex-husband, Wacharapal Tongchai, police superintendent. He had helped her move between provinces, registered vehicles linked to victims, and handled items later identified as stolen. Phone logs showed he contacted her around critical times. He insisted he knew nothing about the murders, but investigators believed he had indirectly protected her. He was charged with receiving stolen property, forgery, and assisting fraud. Yet even with these surrounding figures, the investigation always returned to herself, a woman who learned how quickly cyanide silences a body, how rarely autopsies are demanded, and how deeply people trust someone who speaks gently and cries convincingly. She exploited Thai funeral customs, cultural expectations, and personal relationships with precision. It wasn't rage or impulse that drove her, it was need, opportunity, and the cold calculation that death erases debt. In November 2024, the court sentenced to death for the murder of Sae-Ueng and multiple counts of poisoning, fraud, and theft. 14 deaths remain under separate investigation. Through it all, she showed almost no reaction, the same quiet mask she carried to every funeral, every hospital room, and every final moment she spent beside the people whose lives ended in her presence. For investigators, the conclusion was stark. Didn't kill because she was violent. She killed because people trusted her. And she learned again and again that trust, when weaponized, can be deadlier than poison. They called him the Jack the Ripper of Thailand, a man who smiled gently, spoke softly, and never looked dangerous. But beneath that quiet face was a killer who murdered, repented, was forgiven, and then killed again. Somkid Pumpuang was born on January 7, 1964, in Tung Song, Nakhon Si Thammarat. He grew up poor and restless, drifting from town to town, working as a bus conductor, karaoke technician, hotel cleaner. He was small, reserved, and calculating, with a criminal record for petty theft and fraud. He learned how quickly people trusted someone who seemed humble, and how easily that trust could be used against them. By early 2005, he was traveling across the northern provinces under false names, pretending to be a music promoter or sound engineer. He targeted women who worked as singers, receptionists, or masseuses, women who lived alone and believed in luck. They saw him as polite, generous, even spiritual. He saw them as opportunity. According to police records, the first killing happened on January 30, 2005, in Mukhandan province. Waruni Pimporbut, a cafe singer, was found dead in her hotel room, her hands reportedly tied behind her back with her own bra. She had drowned in the bathtub. A gold necklace, a phone, and a motorcycle were missing. On June 4, Pongphan Sepchai, a massage worker, was found strangled in a hotel in Lampong. A week later, June 11th, Pacheri Amatanirand, another cafe singer, was killed in Trong province, a power cord wrapped around her neck. On June 18th, Porntawan Pankabut was discovered dead in a hotel in Udon Thani, strangled like the others. And only 3 days later, June 21st, Sompong Pimpornpirm, a masseuse, was found inside a rented villa in Buriram. Each scene was almost identical. The woman strangled, her valuables gone, the body covered neatly with a towel or blanket. Investigators later called it a disturbing sign of ritual or remorse. For months, police across 5 provinces struggled to connect the murders. Then forensic results tied fingerprints and DNA from all 5 crime scenes to a single man. In June 2005, officers arrested Somkid Pumpuang at a train station in Nakhon Ratchasima. He confessed calmly, describing each killing in chilling detail. He said he strangled the women with his hands, then covered them so they wouldn't feel cold. The nation watched as newspapers printed his face under a single headline, "Kid the Ripper." The court sentenced him to death, later reduced to life imprisonment after he cooperated with police. In prison, Somkid was obedient, quiet, even helpful. He read Buddhist texts, cleaned floors, gave sermons to other inmates. Guards called him a model prisoner. After 14 years, in May 2019, he was granted a royal pardon and walked out of prison a free man. 7 months later, he killed again. In December 2019, in Kon Kan province, police received a call from a small house in Nong Yai village. A woman named Supaporn Sankla, 51, a hotel maid, had been found dead, strangled with a rope. Her gold necklace was missing. Neighbors said she had recently met a man online who called himself Pumpuang, a lawyer who claimed his wife had recently died. They had lived together for less than 3 weeks. That morning she made him breakfast. By noon, she was dead. When investigators checked her phone, they found calls linked to Somkid Pumpuang, the same man freed months earlier for good behavior. A nationwide manhunt began. Television screens showed his face again, the same calm expression, the same half-smile. 3 days later, a young passenger on a train heading north recognized him and quietly texted police. At the next stop, officers boarded and surrounded him. Somkid did not run. He looked up and said, "You are very good." During questioning, he first denied the killing, then claimed the victim had insulted him. Police found his fingerprints on the rope and his DNA on her body. He was charged with premeditated murder. In March 2021, the Kon Ken Provincial Court sentenced him to death again. This time there was no appeal, no pardon, no chance of release. The murder of Supaporn Sankla shocked the country. How could a serial killer once called Thailand's most dangerous man be set free? Government officials ordered an investigation into the parole system. The Department of Corrections apologized publicly and rewrote the rules. No convicted serial killer would ever again be eligible for early release. For psychologists, Somkid was the definition of emotional emptiness. He killed not for lust or anger, but for control. He could imitate calm, rehearse kindness, and wear it like a mask. Behind that mask was a man who believed obedience could erase murder. When the judge read his final sentence, he only bowed his head. There was no emotion. For the families of his victims, justice had finally come, but far too late. For Thailand, his story became a warning about trust, mercy, and the illusion of reform. He was the man they called Kid the Ripper, the killer who fooled everyone, walked free, and proved that even monsters can learn how to behave. In 2011, a quiet fear began to spread across Thailand's northeast. Taxi drivers and small pickup owners were disappearing, not all at once, not in one town, but along the open highways that connect Isan's provinces. Each man was last seen taking on a passenger who seemed ordinary, calm, soft-spoken, carrying only a small bag. Days later, their trucks turned up miles away, sold, stripped, or abandoned. The drivers were gone. That passenger was Nirut Sonkhamhan, born on August 5, 1969, in Kalasin province. He had once driven a taxi himself, knew every road, and understood the habits of other drivers. People who knew him described him as reserved, distant, almost mechanical. He wasn't violent by nature, at least not at first. He had debts, failed jobs, and a mind that treated opportunity like arithmetic. And when he discovered how easy it was to make a driver disappear, murder became part of the equation. Between 2011 and 2012, Nirut moved from province to province: Kalasin, Royet, Udon Thani, Mahasarakam, and Konkan. He approached independent drivers with offers that seemed harmless: a delivery job, a one-way ride, quick cash. During the trip, he would buy drinks or food for the driver, already laced with poison, most likely pesticide. When the victim grew dizzy, Nirut waited, then stopped the vehicle. He finished the job by smothering or strangling them, dumped the body in a pond or river, and drove away in the stolen truck. Within days, the vehicle would be sold through underground dealers using forged papers. By the end of the spree, 9 people had been attacked. 6 were dead. 3 survived. The victims' names appear in police files as Praset Patat, Yupin Jongkem, Suit Bunmak, Narab Praton, Anucha Tamsak, and Samai Buchart, all male drivers in their 30s and 40s who made a living behind the wheel. 3 others, Wanchai Bunmichai, Tanom Sri Sawat, and Jirawat Chansri, survived the poisoning attempts and later helped identify Nirut. They all gave the same description: a thin, quiet man in his 40s, watchful and unnervingly calm. The first known murder occurred in January 2011. Praset Patat, 42, from Kalasin, was found near Lampau Dam, his body tied with wire and weighed down by concrete blocks. Months later, in Royet and Udon Thani, 2 more drivers went missing, their vehicles reappearing hundreds of kilometers away under new names. Every case followed the same pattern: a long trip, a trusted passenger, a sudden silence. Police at first saw no link, the provinces were far apart, but then a surviving driver came forward, reporting that he'd been offered a drink by a man named Nirut, and that drink had nearly killed him. Investigators began tracing vehicle sales. Each missing truck had been sold within days, often for under 200,000 baht, using fake registration papers. The chain led back to Kalasin. On April 16, 2012, police raided a small rented room there and found Nirut surrounded by cash, identity papers, and a notebook filled with dates, vehicle models, and sale prices. It was a ledger of death. Under interrogation, he admitted to killing 6 people and attacking 3 others. He spoke without emotion, explaining each step as if describing a job. He said he never meant to kill, only to steal. But autopsies told a different story. Every victim had been poisoned, bound, and suffocated before disposal. He chose drivers who worked alone, owned newer trucks, and could be easily replaced without suspicion. He recorded what he earned beside each name. To him, it was business. 2 days later, before he could face trial, Nirut Sonkhamhan was found dead in his cell, hanged with his bedsheet, the knot tied neatly against the iron bars. Police ruled it suicide. Others believed he feared retaliation once his crimes became public. Whatever the reason, his death ended the case abruptly. There would be no verdict, no sentence, no chance for answers. Psychologists later described him as methodical and detached, a man who killed not from anger or impulse, but because killing made theft easier. He had no hatred for his victims. He simply erased them to remove inconvenience. Among Thai investigators, he became known as one of the most organized serial killers the country had ever seen. After his death, his notebook was shown briefly to the press. Each line was clean, numbered, and priced. For the families of his victims, it was the only record left, a reminder that their loved ones had been reduced to transactions. In the months that followed, the government tightened passenger verification laws, and posters began appearing at rest stops. Beware of strangers who offer good money for a ride. But for many drivers, the fear lingered. Some refused to take night trips. Others kept hidden cameras in their cabs. The story of Nirut Sonkhamhan became a cautionary tale for everyone who works alone on Thailand's endless roads. He didn't look dangerous. He didn't shout or threaten. He sat quietly beside the wheel, waiting for the right moment to strike. And when the trip was over, only the truck came back. He was called the Cannibal of Thailand. For decades, parents frightened their children with his name. If you misbehave, Quey will come for you. But the man behind that legend began as something far more ordinary, a farmer, a migrant, and perhaps a victim of history. Sae-Ueng was born in 1927 in Shantou, a coastal city in Guangdong, China. He grew up amid famine and war. When Japan invaded China, he was barely a teenager. He joined local militias, fighting in a war that left entire villages starving. He saw bodies rot in the streets and learned that survival often meant doing the unthinkable. Some accounts say that during the worst years of famine, he ate human flesh, not from cruelty, but from hunger. That single rumor would follow him for the rest of his life. After World War II, he fled China on a cargo ship bound for Thailand, hoping to start over in a peaceful land. He arrived with no family, no money, and almost no language. He worked as a laborer in farms and factories, quiet and obedient. He never spoke much Thai, and locals found his silence strange. He rented small rooms, cooked alone, and kept to himself. To the people around him, he was an outsider, and in post-war Thailand, that was enough to make him suspicious. Between 1954 and 1958, several children went missing in the central provinces. They were young, between 5 and 11 years old, and each was found dead, the bodies mutilated in ways that horrified investigators. Police could not find a pattern, only whispers of a foreign man seen near the scenes. Newspapers began using one word repeatedly: cannibal. Then came the afternoon that sealed Quey's fate. In 1958, in Rayong province, an 8-year-old boy named Boonpeng went to a vegetable field where Quey worked, hoping to buy some greens. He never came home. When his father went searching, he found Quey near a pile of burning leaves. Beneath the smoke lay the body of his son. The villagers tied him up and handed him to the police. He was accused not only of killing Boon, but of murdering 5 other children across multiple provinces over the previous 4 years. The youngest victim was 5, the oldest 11. Each had been strangled or stabbed. Investigators claimed the organs were missing. They said Quey had eaten them. He confessed to murder under questioning, but denied cannibalism. He said, "I killed because I wanted to see what was inside." But there were no photos, no preserved organs, no medical proof, only statements and fear. To the Thai public, it didn't matter. A foreigner had killed their children, and the horror was too great to question. Police paraded him before cameras. Reporters wrote of ritual killings and the man who ate hearts. He barely understood the questions shouted at him. He couldn't read the newspapers that called him a monster. He spoke in broken Thai, trying to explain, but his words were twisted through translation. Within months, he became the face of evil itself. In 1959, at just 32 years old, Quey was executed by firing squad. Doctors had debated whether he was insane or simply inhuman. The government never reached a conclusion. His body was sent to Sararat Hospital for study. For decades afterward, his mummified corpse stood upright in a glass case, his skin coated in wax, his face locked in a permanent expression of guilt. The label read, "Cannibal Serial Killer." Children grew up hearing his name. Tourists came to stare at his preserved body. He became a myth, half human, half ghost, the eternal warning to every child who disobeyed. But as the years passed, cracks began to show in the story. Researchers revisited the old police files and newspaper archives. They found that most of the supposed cannibalism came from rumors, not evidence. Autopsy reports mentioned no missing organs. Witnesses had changed their stories, and the confessions, translated from a man who barely spoke Thai, had never been independently verified. Some historians now believe Quey may have been guilty of a single killing, but blamed for others simply because he fit the fear. He was Chinese, poor, and alone, the perfect scapegoat at a time when Thailand needed one. Psychologists suggested that if he truly was a murderer, his violence might have come from trauma, a mind shaped by hunger, war, and isolation. To him, flesh might have been survival, not ritual. But the truth was lost long ago, buried beneath myth and xenophobia. More than 60 years later, the debate still continues. In 2019, Thai activists launched a petition demanding that his body be cremated, arguing that he had been dehumanized long enough. Over 18,000 people signed. In response, Sararat Hospital removed the word cannibal from his display and replaced it with a simple plaque bearing his name. In 2020, monks performed a proper cremation ceremony for him. For the first time in 60 decades, the man once called a monster was allowed to rest. Today, Quey's story divides Thailand. To some, he remains a child killer, a legend of fear. To others, he is a symbol of injustice, a migrant who could not speak for himself, condemned by panic and prejudice. Every generation asks the same question: was he truly a murderer, or just a stranger lost in translation? Perhaps Quey was guilty of murder, or perhaps he was simply guilty of being foreign in a time and place that could not forgive the unfamiliar. More than a century ago, when Thailand was still known as Siam, the capital was a maze of canals and temples, and crime was judged not only by law, but by karma. It was a time of kings, monks, and executioners. Among the many tales passed down from that era, none is more haunting than the story of Boonpeng Heep, the man who killed his lovers, sealed their bodies in iron chests, and sank them beneath the river. On a quiet afternoon by the Chao Phraya River in Nonthaburi, fishermen noticed something drifting near the temple pier, a large iron chest, heavy and expensive-looking. Such chests were used by the wealthy to store gold or documents. Curious, they dragged it to shore and forced it open, expecting treasure. What they found was horror. The body of a young woman wrapped in mosquito netting, bruises around her neck, her lungs filled with water. Inside the chest were bricks, enough to keep it submerged. The news spread quickly through the town. The police came, confused and cautious. No one could identify her. Until the next day. A grieving woman arrived at the police station. Her daughter, 20-year-old Preek, had gone missing days earlier. She told officers that her daughter was married to a rich man who ignored her. Desperate for affection, Preek had become involved with another man, a handsome monk-turned-sorcerer named Boonpeng. He had once borrowed her gold necklace and promised to return it. That was the last anyone saw of her. The mother was certain he was responsible. Boonpeng was born around 1910 in a small village near a canal in what is now Nakhon Phanom. He was of mixed Thai-Chinese heritage, raised by an elderly couple in Bangkok after his parents' deaths. Handsome, charming, and eloquent, he learned early that his looks could open doors. He disliked work and spent his time studying black magic, superstition, and love potions. He apprenticed under an undertaker monk, learning the rituals of the dead, spells for desire, protection, and wealth. His foster grandparents disapproved and expelled him from their home. He moved to central Bangkok and was later ordained as a monk at Wat Sararat Kunchorn. There, his charisma drew crowds, especially women seeking love charms. He was admired by followers, respected by some, feared by others. But behind the rituals and prayers, he broke every rule of monastic life. He held late-night ceremonies, accepted money, and allegedly had sexual relations with women as part of his rituals. When his behavior was exposed, the abbot expelled him from the temple. Soon after, he settled at Wat Sutat, promising to change and live righteously. But temptation followed him. He opened a gambling den, seduced wealthy women, and continued his trade in black magic. It was during this time that Preek entered his life, a lonely woman seeking a love potion to win back her husband. Instead, she became Boonpeng's mistress. Some accounts claimed she might have been pregnant, though this was never confirmed. When she demanded he take responsibility, he refused, already engaged to another woman. To silence her, he lured her to his house under the pretense of returning her necklace, murdered her, and sealed her body inside an iron chest weighted with bricks, and then hired a rickshaw driver to dump it into the river. For days, the investigation went nowhere. Then the rickshaw driver came forward, saying Boonpeng had paid him to dispose of a heavy trunk at night. Police raided Wat Sutat, where Boonpeng was preparing for his wedding, and arrested him at the ceremony in front of stunned guests. He confessed immediately. In his statement, he said Preek was not his first victim. He had previously killed a jewelry merchant named Nai Lerm after a dispute over stolen valuables. And there were others, he claimed, 5, maybe more, most of them women who came to him for charms and ended up as sacrifices to his greed. He always used the same method: an iron chest, a river, and silence. Investigators believed there were up to 7 victims. 3 bodies were recovered, the rest were lost to the water. Each showed signs of strangulation. The media, still young at the time, called him Boonpeng Iron Chest. He became the first person in Siam to be publicly labeled a serial killer. In 1918, the court sentenced him to death by beheading, the traditional method of execution. On August 19, 1919, Boonpeng was led to the execution ground near Wat Phra Si Mahatat. He knelt calmly, recited prayers, and bowed his head before the sword fell. Hundreds watched as the blade severed his neck. It was one of the last public executions in Thai history. His head was displayed briefly as a warning. His body was buried near Wat Pasi, close to the San Seb Canal. But death did not end his story. Over the following decades, rumors began to grow. Fishermen swore they saw iron chests glimmering beneath the water. Monks claimed to hear footsteps at night near the temple. Villagers believed his restless spirit wandered the canals, seeking forgiveness from those he had killed. Over time, fear turned into reverence. a shrine was built at Wat Pasi to appease his ghost. People began leaving offerings of incense and flowers, calling him Uncle Boonpeng. They said his spirit had been purified by time and transformed from killer to guardian. Historians today view the Boonpeng case as a bridge between two eras, when Siam shifted from superstition to law, from oral legend to written record. His murders were real, but the myths that followed blurred truth with belief. He killed for desire and profit, then was remembered as both sinner and saint. Even now, his story is retold by guides along Bangkok's old canals, where the water still moves slowly and the past feels close enough to touch. Boonpeng Heep was executed more than 100 years ago, yet his legacy survives because it reveals something deeper than murder. It shows how brutality can become legend, and how the line between fear and faith fades with time. He was Thailand's first recorded serial killer, and the first to be both cursed and worshipped. From the rivers of old Siam to the prisons of modern Bangkok, Thailand's killers have changed with each generation, from superstition to greed, from ritual to revenge. Each one left a scar on the nation's memory, and together they remind us of one unchanging truth: evil never disappears, it only changes its form. From the rivers of old Siam to the crowded streets of modern Bangkok, Thailand's darkest crimes tell a story of change, from rituals of blood to poisons in silence, from myth to motive, from fear to greed. Each killer in this list came from ordinary places, lived ordinary lives, and carried their evil behind ordinary smiles. Boonpeng believed in black magic. Sae-Ueng was condemned by hysteria. Nirut turned death into business. Somkid killed for control. And Sararat, the woman who smiled through funerals, used trust itself as a weapon. Their stories span more than 100 years, yet the question they leave behind never changes. How well can we ever truly know the people around us? Evil rarely announces itself. It doesn't always wear rage or madness. Sometimes it looks kind. Sometimes it looks familiar. And sometimes it looks like a friend. Thailand's history of serial killers is not just about the crimes themselves, but about the reflection they cast on society, on fear, on faith, and on the fragility of human morality. Each generation created its own monster, and in chasing them, we learned more about ourselves than about them. The legends of Boonpeng and Sae-Ueng have already faded into ghost stories, but the lessons remain. That beneath the calm surface of every culture, there is always a darker current, a reminder that evil does not belong to any one place, any one time, or any one face. This is Dark Crimes Real, where we look into the stories the world tries to forget, because every crime, no matter how long ago, leaves a trace.